Welcome back to our final session for the Fall 2020 Philanthropy Advocates Policy Convening. I'm Win Rosser, President and CEO of the CLL Temple Foundation based in Lufkin, Texas. Also chair of the Leadership Committee for Philanthropy Advocates. Happy to welcome everyone back for what I know is always a crowd favorite. We are joined by the founder and CEO of the Texas Tribune, Evan Smith, one of those people who really doesn't need an introduction. So I will quickly transition it over to Ellen Ray. This is always a fun opportunity to be entertained and to have a really thought-provoking material put in front of us. Evan is pretty good at reading the tea leaves. I'm looking forward to it. Ellen Ray joins us again to introduce Evan formally.
Thank you, Win. It's my pleasure today to introduce Evan Smith. Of course, you all know Evan, and you know he's passionate about politics, passionate about public policy, passionate about nonprofit journalism. Some of you may even know that he is passionate about tennis. Evan has not been shy about saying that playing tennis has really helped him to keep sane in the COVID era. And I understand that he also hasn't been shy about wearing his tennis shorts on Zoom calls like these in the COVID era. So Evan, if that's the case, we totally understand. Yeah. No judgment, my friend. We hope you can get out on the court again soon. But Evan is also passionate about civic engagement, as is evidenced by the Tribune's mission, the goal of which is, and I quote, to promote civic engagement and discourse on public policy, politics, government, and other matters of statewide concern. And that makes the Tribune a natural partner with philanthropy as we jointly seek to bring issues, stories, and facts about our state into the spotlight. Funders act upon the news that we read about in the digital pages of the Tribune, and increasingly we take that action together, joining forces to address the complex challenges that Texas faces. The partnership between philanthropy advocates and the Tribune goes all the way back to the beginning for both organizations, as they're almost exactly the same age. We have valued Evan's insights for a decade, and we appreciate the Tribune's extensive coverage of all matters related to public ed. Just this week, the Trib is also hosting a great series about the future of higher education, bringing together a powerful cross-section of viewpoints to illuminate the tough issues facing students, families, and institutions right now. The week of November 9 through 13, I hope you'll tune in again, this time for the Future of Rural Symposium, which will be held over the lunch hour every day that week and is sponsored by the Texas Rural Funders. As some of you may have heard me say this morning, the Rural Funders believe that urban and rural communities are inextricably linked and that both need to thrive for our state to be successful. So please plan to join us for some terrific panels that Evan has organized about education, healthcare, the environment, broadband, the investment in which, or lack thereof, impacts us all. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Evan, to, as Win said, read the tea leaves for us and to tell us what to expect next week, oh my goodness, and in the months ahead in Texas politics and policy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Ellen Ray, thank you. Ellen is the person who I am most afraid of in the world, and she is my real boss, no matter who I actually work for, and so it's so great and an honor to be introduced by Ellen. Ellen, I'm going to say something I've never said at the beginning of a speech. I'm wearing pants, so don't worry. I did get dressed for this. Everybody, I know there are many friends on the call and some people who I hope will be new friends after we're done today. I want to thank you so much for joining. I do believe in the mission of philanthropy advocates. I believe in Jennifer Esterline, all Esterlines actually. She's in fact my favorite Esterline. And I think that the important work that you all do does make Texas a better place, and so please keep at it. And whether you're with an individual organization or the collective, I just think that there's never been a more important time to do what you do. So thank you very much. I'm going to share my slides. I'm going to take you through some slides about the elections to come. And then I'm going to leave a lot of time for questions. And I don't know that this was necessarily said. If it was said and I didn't hear it, let me repeat it. But if not, let me say it for the first time that please put questions in the chat. And I'm going to leave a healthy amount of time at the back end for chat. Very quickly, I want to just note that Election Day, November 3rd, is not the only reason that that day is momentous. It is also the 11th anniversary of the launch of the Texas Tribune as a digital news organization about and for Texas and Texans. We are pleased to have been in business long enough to have not only become the establishment of sorts in journalism, but also to have been a model for news organizations that have borrowed with our help the Texas Tribune's playbook and started in their own states. We are in the business of, obviously, of focusing on Texas and providing the kind of reliable, credible coverage of the news that is so important to all of us in our daily lives here in the state of Texas. But it is gratifying for us to see that a movement of sorts has emerged around the country, where in every single state there is an organization that calls itself the Texas Tribune of blank, and they see their mission as every bit as important to their community as we see ours here. Those of you on the call who support the Texas Tribune financially, please know that by solving our news desert problem, you have solved the nation's news desert problem. Your impact is greater than you know, and your contribution has a greater reach than you imagine. So thank you very much for that. My job today is to talk about the state of race, the state of play in a state in play. Let me say that again. The state of play in a state in play. The fact that I'm sitting here with you 4 days before the election calling Texas a state in play is quite remarkable, at least to me, maybe to some of you. I have been in the skeptic camp, to say the least, over the last 30 years. Every 2 or 4 years, we hear the drumbeats from the left. Oh, Texas is going to turn blue. This is the cycle. This is the season. This is the election, and it doesn't happen. Just to level set you, it has been now 26 years. 1994 was the last time that a statewide Democrat was elected. And every time there's been an election since, we're told, you know, well, this is the one, this is the one, this is the one. I've gotten to the point of describing myself as the last person airlifted off the roof of the embassy at the end of the war. I am the one who doesn't believe that fighting has stopped. And, you know, that's a good place to be journalistically, always question everything. But this has become, for better or worse, my brand in the universe of Texas politics, that I'm just the biggest skeptic in the world about this stuff. On Sunday, there was a Dallas Morning News University of Texas at Tyler poll that had Joe Biden ahead by 3 points. And I guess I've been saying this enough that it's sinking in, because I got a text about 5 minutes after I tweeted about the poll. 5 minutes after, I got a text from Beto ORourke that said, "Are you on the roof of the embassy yet?" The short answer is I am on the roof of the embassy. And I'm not the only one. I am prepared to say now, with a straight face and a pure heart, that I do believe Texas is in play, and that Texas, this election cycle, even 4 days out from the election, is a toss-up. You may see here that the Cook Political Report, which is the best regarded of the organizations that does ratings of races and, you know, analyses of the way that states are trending politically and all that, and indispensable at election time, they, a couple days ago, moved Texas from lean Republican to toss-up. Another organization similar to the Cook Political Report followed suit and rated Texas a toss-up. This is no longer just a topic of speculation in insider circles in Texas, or even in outsider circles in Texas. This is a national conversation, to the point that I was on Morning Joe this morning at whatever ungodly hour it was, 6:30, talking about Texas in play. I will note that I received only an 8 out of 10 from Rate My Skype Room, which is a terrible blow to my self-confidence. And I'm intending in the next couple of days, because I'll be on again on election day, to rectify the long list of grievances that he had about my camera shot. But I think the fact that the national news programs are themselves focused on this question of Texas being in play is really the greatest sign of how this conversation is proceeding. And I just think there's so much to say, and I will say, about where we find ourselves today. And look, speaking of today and where we find ourselves, as of this morning, which includes the early vote totals from yesterday, right? We're in a period of 3 weeks of early vote. Today is the last full day of early voting in Texas. I think 7 o'clock tonight is the last hour. That's when that cuts off, early vote. Then you got to jump forward to Tuesday, election day, which is going to be a hot mess. We have now passed in the early voting period our highest ever level of total voter turnout, which was 8.93 something million in the 2016 presidential race. That was the highest ever level of turnout in the history of Texas. Texas has a reputation as a bad voter turnout state. This has been the case for a long time. That has been our brand. And 2018, we actually began to shed that label. We had 8.3 million people turn out to vote in what are traditionally lower turnout midterm elections. In a midterm election, we had 8.3 million people turn out to vote. And it was a much closer election because more people turned out. And when you have a higher turnout election, it's a more likely than not, it's a competitive race. And it was, of course, in 2018. And again, I'll talk about that in a second. So, you know, the 9 million, almost 9 million in 2016, we thought, well, we hope that the turnout in 2020 is going to be higher. We had no idea how high it would be. And remember, this is in the middle of a pandemic in a state that has not enabled more people to vote. It has disabled the options that some people have to vote. It seems to, you know, every time there's an opportunity to get in the way of people voting, that's what seems to have happened. But we have nonetheless put on the board the highest voter turnout ever. I'm telling you, I think it will be 12 million. Maybe wrong, but I'm not the only one who thinks this. I think we will have 12 million people turned out to vote in this election by the time this is over, which would be fully 1/3 more than the record in Texas. And it has all kinds of implications if, in fact, that's what happens. If you pay attention to no other slide today, this is the slide I pay attention to. This is the one that I think tells you everything you need to know about the likely outcome on Tuesday. This is the order of probability slide. First, second, third, fourth. First, most probable. Fourth, least probable. There are 36 members of the U.S. House. The delegation is right now divided as 23 Republicans and 13 Democrats. Democrats won 2 seats in the 2018 election. It was 25-11 before that. There are legitimately 4, 5, 6, some number of seats that are in play. I don't think the Democrats are going to win unless there's a tsunami. The wave is a tsunami or a full-on sharknado, sharks flying through the air. I don't think the Democrats are going to win more than, 2, 3, 4 seats, but still, I think Democrats winning congressional seats from Republicans is not something that, again, up until 2018 really happened too often in recent memory. And so if the delegation becomes closer in its partisan split, if it goes from 23-13, say, to 19-17, or it even goes to 18-18, which is not outside the realm of possibility, that's an enormous accomplishment for the Democrats in Texas. They have been pretty downtrodden for several election cycles. And so I think that the likelihood of that, I'll talk in a bit about which ones are likeliest to flip, but that is the highest probability outcome on Tuesday. Second highest probability is that the majority control of the Texas House flips. Right now it's 83-67 Republican to Democrat. It was 95-55 before the 2018 election. Democrats won 12 seats that year. And so the Democrats heading into this election are a net gain of 9 seats away from taking control of the House, taking control of the speakership, heading into a session in which redistricting will be among the items on the agenda. Very, very important. And I think that's the next likeliest outcome. The third likeliest outcome is that the Democrats win at the presidential level, Joe Biden beating Donald Trump. Really, as I'll explain in a second, it's going to be more Donald Trump beating himself. This is a race that is close. It's probably a couple points right now on the Republican side, although God knows if Joe Biden won Texas on Tuesday and we discover that on Wednesday or someday subsequently, it would not be the most surprising thing in the world. I'm still of a mind that this is going to be a very close race, but that probably by a hair Donald Trump wins. But again, it's possible that it happens that the Democrats win, but that would be less probable than the other two. And then finally, the U.S. Senate seat flipping from Republican to Democrat. John Cornyn is almost certainly going to run a couple points ahead of Donald Trump, and so we have to see how that all plays out. It's an order of probability slide. It's also in some ways a preconditions slide. 1 has to happen for 2 to happen, 1 and 2 have to happen for 3 to happen, and 1, 2, and 3 almost certainly have to happen for 4 to happen. So that's kind of how to think about Tuesday and the elections. Let's talk about the presidential race. In a country that is younger and more female and less white than ever, we somehow end up with these 2 guys as the major party candidates. two old white guys. In fact, remarkably, in this election, Donald Trump is the young guy. How is that possible? Especially on the Democratic side, where the field started out to be the most diverse in every way. Candidates of color, more women running for president, and in this really seriously than at any point in our history. And yet this is where we ended up. One way to think about this race is Trump versus Biden, because every presidential election is a choice and not a referendum. Another way to think about it is that this is the rare election that is entirely a referendum. Every presidential election is supposedly is about the next 4 years, but some of them are more so about the last 4 years. This one is absolutely about the last 4 years. And look, let's say this with regard to Donald Trump. He wants everything to be about him. He tells us every day, multiple times, well, he's going to get his wish. In this election, Donald Trump's real opponent is Donald Trump. Had the Democrats nominated somebody who Republicans could rally against, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, whatever you think of those two, this is not a knock on them, but that would have been a more straight A to B through line narrative case. But Biden doesn't present the same target. In fact, the challenge that Trump has had in this election is trying to figure out a line of attack against Biden that has been able to stick. Sleepy Joe, corrupt Joe, Beijing Biden, all the Hunter Biden stuff, nothing is working. And that's because Joe Biden has been in public life for nearly 50 years. By the way, fun fact, Joe Biden and Senfronia Thompson were elected the same year. Joe Biden to the Senate, Senfronia Thompson to the House. Joe Biden's been in office for so long that everybody knows who he is. And everybody saw him as vice president for 8 years. And these attacks don't have the same resonance. And at this point, unlike 2016, everybody knows who Donald Trump is, for good and for bad. So Donald Trump's problem is Donald Trump. Donald Trump's problem is the last 4 years. And he has to figure out how to convey to people that the last 4 years were a positive and not a negative. And at least at this point, he's not doing that. If you look at the 538 average of presidential polls, they do a daily average. The average 4 days from election day right now is nearly 9 points. This is the popular vote. This is the national polls. This time, 4 years ago, Hillary Clinton was probably at about a third or even a quarter of this margin and trending downward because, of course, by this point 4 years ago, the Comey letter had happened and the Clinton campaign was beginning to see the wheels come off. This has been a remarkably stable race. Look all the way back to the beginning of this year. At no point in the average of polls has Donald Trump been ahead. This is really just a pretty stable race. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. Nothing that the president has done, nothing that Joe Biden has done, managed to change this race. And you know what? We don't have a national election. Let's stipulate. We do not elect people on the basis of the popular vote. We elect them on the basis of the Electoral College. So in some ways, this doesn't matter. This is like betting on sports in states in which gambling is illegal. It's for entertainment purposes only. This is not really something that matters. If the national polls mattered, if the popular vote mattered, Hillary Clinton would have been president, Al Gore would have been president. So maybe we shouldn't look at this stuff, although at a certain point where the margin in the popular vote gets to be so big, it becomes hard to imagine how, for instance, Joe Biden could win the popular vote by 9 points and not win the electoral vote. The distribution of the popular vote is not that upside down. So let's instead look at the state polls. Well, if you look at the state polls, really, it's a 50-state election, not a national election. And really, that's not even right. It's not a 50-state election because we know what's going to happen in California and New York. We know what's going to happen in Utah and Wyoming. It's really down to about 8, 9, 10, 11 states that are the so-called battleground states. Places like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia, Ohio, North Carolina. Texas actually is on the verge of being a battleground state this year. It's probably on the lower end of the spectrum as far as that goes. But look, if you look at the aggregation of these polls, you know, there's a lot of blue on there. And in the case of the red in, you know, Rasmussen reports or the Trafalgar Group, those are Republican polls that almost always show the president ahead in places where he's not. So I think if you look at the state polls, you get a very different impression of this race, but a very similar impression to the national polls. And I think, honestly, if you go back 4 years and you were looking at the state polls, Clinton versus Trump, this would not be as blue. The signs of trouble were visible at that time. This is the electoral map from 2016. This is how it turned out in 2016. Trump got 306 electoral votes. Clinton got 232. I probably came before a version of this group prior to the 2016 election and said Democrats have this because there are something like 18 or 19 states where the Democrats have won that state and that state's electoral votes for 6 consecutive elections, going all the way back to Clinton. I think it was probably Clinton, Kerry, Obama. I'm probably, maybe it was Gore. So basically the 6 prior elections prior to 2016, Democrats had won those states every single time. 3 of the states that they had won every single time, which no one saw coming as flipping from blue to red, were New York, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And as we know what happened in the last election, a total of 77,000 votes arrayed across the 3 states, Trump managed to win those 3 and add up the electoral votes in those 3 states, 46 between the 3 states. You need 270 to win, 306 minus 46, 260. Donald Trump does not win. So those 3 states were decisive in terms of the outcome of the election. Now, this is a map that shows Biden winning Pennsylvania and Michigan, but Trump holding on to Wisconsin, which is the most Trump-like state in terms of the demographic makeup. If this happens, if Biden wins back Pennsylvania and Michigan, wins no other states back from Trump, but Trump manages to hold on to Wisconsin, just Wisconsin, Trump wins the election 270 to 268. So it is really critical that those upper Midwestern states not be in the Trump camp. Biden's job number 1 has to be to win those 3 states. Now, let's assume he doesn't win those 3 states, but he does win Florida, which does seem, according to the latest polls, Biden's a couple points ahead in Florida. Florida has always been a close state. Trump beat Clinton in Florida by 1.2% in 2016. Obama beat Romney in Florida in 2012 by under a point. Of course, here we sit 20 years ago was Bush Gore, the hanging chads, Florida as the decider. So Florida is always close. Let's assume Florida goes to Biden. Trump manages to win Wisconsin. Biden wins the election at this point kind of by a wider margin, 297 to 241. So what you'll hear about Florida said between now and the election, you've probably been hearing it, is that for Biden, Florida is a nice to have, and for Trump, Florida is a must have. If you're watching on election night and the results are coming in and you're wondering, are we going to know what happens on election night? I would observe that Florida counts early. The mail-in ballots and the election night vote, it's in the Eastern time zone. We're going to know pretty early on the evening of Tuesday, Florida, North Carolina, another one. I think you're going to see the contours of this election outcome take shape. If Trump holds North Carolina and Florida, it's going to be a long night and possibly a long few weeks. If Biden wins Florida and North Carolina, my friends, this election is over. And it is almost certainly going to be a landslide because North Carolina and Florida do not go without a whole bunch of other states going. This is a map that shows Florida staying with Trump. Biden wins the 3 upper Midwestern states, but he also wins Arizona. Arizona is the state that has been threatening to flip for some time. And I think that finally the Democratic dog caught the car. You have the benefit of a Senate race that is even wider in margin, Democrat over Republican. It's Mark Kelly, Gabrielle Gifford's husband, the former astronaut and veteran, over Martha McSally. He's going to win that race walking away, and Biden is ahead. And, you know, basically Arizona is Maricopa County. Maricopa County last time went for Trump, and in all the polls right now, Maricopa County is going for Biden. So that's 11 electoral votes. Even if Biden loses Wisconsin, he's still okay if he wins Arizona. So pretty interesting. This is the map that shows you if all the polls today are correct. And every place that Biden is thought to be ahead, he wins. He wins. Back those 3 upper Midwestern states. He wins North Carolina. He wins Florida. He wins Arizona. He wins Iowa. He wins Ohio. And he wins the Nebraska rogue electoral vote. And he wins the Maine rogue electoral vote. It becomes absolutely a landslide, 375 to 163. More electoral votes than Obama got either time. The last slide I'm going to show you on the electoral map is what happens if Trump holds those upper Midwestern states, and the only state that flips is Texas. The only one that flips is Texas. What happens at that point? Well, Biden wins 270 to 268. This is why the focus on Texas is so important. Texas alone would put Biden over the top. Texas is a nice to have, like Florida, for Biden. It is an absolute must have for Trump. So what is the story with Texas? Well, in 2016, Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton by 9 points. That was the closest presidential race in 20 years since Bob Dole beat the other Clinton, Bill, by only 5 points, aided by Ross Perot in 96, siphoning off a certain number of votes as a third-party candidate. It wasn't that Hillary Clinton overperformed. She got 43 or so percent, which is roughly what Democrats have gotten over time. But he underperformed. He got only 52%. And so Democrats took that as a good sign that, well, okay, we held a Republican presidential candidate to 9 points. The last time a Democrat has won the state was Jimmy Carter 44 years ago in 1976. And the closest presidential race ever was 1.3%. That was Hubert Humphrey over Richard Nixon in 1968, very long time ago. And that was also aided by a third-party candidate, George Wallace, taking a significant portion of the vote. So you have 2016, where the margin was already narrower than it typically is. And then you have 2018, where we have this crazy turnout. 8.3 million people turn out to vote in the midterm, which is 3.7 million more than the previous midterm. You have a Senate race between Beto ORourke, who going into the race, nobody knows, and at the end of the race, everybody knows. Turns out to be the most articulate and empathetic and charismatic Democrat to run for statewide office since Ann Richards. And you have Ted Cruz, who is bruised after the 2016 presidential race and is not necessarily the most popular person in his own party. And you have a 2.6% Senate race, the closest Senate race in 40 years. By comparison, John Cornyn, running for re-election 4 years earlier in 2014, he wins by 26 points. So Beto gets the margin down by 90%. So you have also with Beto, 4 million plus votes is the most votes that a statewide candidate among the Democrats has ever gotten in history. No Democrat running for statewide office has ever gotten as many votes as Beto ORourke gets in 2018. So you've got the narrow margin, relatively speaking, in 2016, and you've got this race in 2018. And now you go ahead to 2020. Remember I said the closest presidential race in history was 1.3%, Humphrey over Nixon. The 538 average in Texas, as we sit here today, 4 days out from the election, I can hardly believe it myself, 1.3 points. What's going to happen? I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, this tells me that this race really is legitimately in play. So let's go on to Congress. After the last election, we had 2 seats flip from Democrats to Republicans. Democrats looked at not only the places they won, but the places they lost, which were traditionally 15 to 20 point losses, except last time they were more like 3 point losses, 4 point losses, 5 point losses. So they identified somewhere in the vicinity of 8 seats that they thought they could pick up potentially this time if they invested. They opened an office of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, DCCC. They opened an office in Austin. They said, we're going to really spend money in Texas and we're going to recruit great candidates and we're going to go after these guys. There are 4 races that are really legitimately pickup opportunities for the Democrats. Sri Kulkarni on the left is running in Fort Bend County. This is the old Pete Olson, and before that, Tom DeLay seat in a place that was never open to Democrats, but Fort Bend County is now full-on blue, and he looks positioned to win that race. Gina Ortiz-Jones next to him is the candidate who lost by under 1,000 votes to Will Hurd in the district that starts in San Antonio, snakes along the border, and goes up to El Paso. She's in a little bit of a tougher race at the moment than we thought she'd be, but probably she wins in a presidential year with presidential year turnout. Then Candace Valenzuela, who is an educator, would be the first Afro-Latin member of Congress, is running in the old Kenny Marchant seat. This is in Carrollton and kind of west of Dallas in that area, the suburbs. She's running against a pretty good Republican candidate, Beth Van Dyne, the former mayor of Irving. Kulkarni, Jones, and Valenzuela are all running in seats in which the Republican incumbent retired after 2018. That is a major feature of this election cycle, is so many Republican retirements creating opportunities for Democrats. The last of the 4 you'll recognize is Wendy Davis, who was the Democratic candidate for governor in 2014, was famously a state senator from Fort Worth before that, has been living in Austin and is running for an Austin through the Hill Country down to San Antonio congressional seat, that is District 21, currently occupied by the incumbent freshman Chip Roy. This was a district that Lamar Smith had for many years. It was a +9, +10 Republican district. So Republican that Democrats never even bothered to field a candidate in a handful of election cycles. But last time it was a 3-point race. You know, James Carville famously described the state of Pennsylvania politically once as Pittsburgh and Philadelphia separated by Alabama. And that is District 21. It is Austin and San Antonio separated by Alabama. The middle part of that district into the hill country is really conservative. And that is the big obstacle for Wendy Davis. But you know what? Apparently that race is tied right now. She has a real chance of winning that race. So these are the 4 big opportunities, but there are a handful of others out there. And so I'd say 2 to 3 on the low end, 6, maybe 7, 6 on the high end. I mean, if the Democratic turnout is what we think it is, if the overall turnout is 12 million, we're going to have a lot of strange results on election night that we're not expecting. And that is because who turns out in a high turnout election? It is not happy people, it's pissed off people. As my colleague Ross Ramsey says, anger is a greater motivator than joy at election time. Quickly, let me say that the Texas House is next. By the way, I'm sorry, back on the Congress. One of the reasons that these races are so competitive is that Democratic congressional candidates have, for the first time in years, outraised Republican candidates. The amount of money pouring into these races is just crazy. If you look at my colleague Patrick Svitek's tweets after the end of the third quarter and the campaign finance filings, this is the kind of money that you never would have seen before in Democratic congressional campaigns. I mean, it is just off the charts. And, you know, money doesn't do everything for you, but it does buy ads and it pays for mailers and it pays for yard signs. We're not doing a whole lot of door knocking and out on the street organizing this time because of the pandemic, but it's still pretty remarkable. So on the Texas House, I told you what happened in 2018, 12 seats picked up by the Democrats, 83-67. Democrats say we're going after enough seats that we think we can take back the majority. The number of seats they're going after, in fact, is 22. And they are the 22 seats shown here. This is a Democratic Party or House Democratic Campaign Committee, more properly, chart that shows how Beto O'Rourke did in 22 of these House districts compared to Ted Cruz. Of the 22 districts shown, Beto actually beat Cruz in 9 of those districts, highlighted in blue on the right-hand column, and came close or close-ish in the remaining 13, highlighted in yellow on the right-hand column. These are the targets. You know, I mean, just the idea that Sarah Davis was reelected in 2018 by 6.5 points over her challenger, but Beto O'Rourke won that district by 21.5 points, a 28-point swing. Not surprisingly, seats in Harris County and Dallas County are top of the list because those are blue counties, and these are the last remaining, or some of the last remaining Republicans in those counties. And then you get into the suburbs, Collin County, Fort Bend, Denton County. Tarrant County is so interesting to me. You know, since 1952, only one presidential candidate among Democrats, Democratic candidate, since 1952 has won Tarrant County at the presidential election level, and that is LBJ in 64. Obama lost it twice. Hillary Clinton lost it. Beto O'Rourke narrowly beat Ted Cruz in Tarrant County. By the way, Justin Nelson beat Ken Paxton in Tarrant County. We're watching Tarrant County. I mean, there's no surprise that Kamala Harris, who's in Texas today, is in Fort Worth because they know that if they win Tarrant County, it makes the math significantly better for them. Because rural Texas is going to run up the numbers for the Republicans. Urban Texas will run up the numbers for the Democrats. And it becomes those purple suburbs. And in the case of what has been the most conservative large county in the country, Tarrant matters. So anyway, this is the playing field for the Democrats in the Texas House. And they just got to get a net 9. They've got to hold the ones they won last time. And they've got to win enough so that it nets out to be a pickup of 9. It is possible. On the Senate race, John Cornyn is not Ted Cruz and MJ Hager is not Beto O'Rourke. It is unfair to the two of them to make this a comparison to two people they are not. But if you want to understand real politics in this race, Cornyn is a less unattractive figure to some Republicans and to some Democrats than Cruz. And MJ Hager, God bless her, a genuine war hero and somebody who ran a terrific congressional race and is on her absolute best this time. It's just harder for her to get traction in this cycle. I'm not sure that Beto would be Beto, in fairness to MJ Hager this time, because he would not be catching everybody off guard as he did last time. But there are so many competitive Senate races around the country that it's just hard for her to get the same attention that a John Hickenlooper in Colorado or a Mark Kelly in Arizona or a Sarah Gideon in Maine or even a Teresa Greenfield in Iowa is getting, and that's made it hard. The money differential has been hard, although she's kind of caught up. But it's just a hard race to win. Is it impossible for her to win? No. Is it likely? No. And the polls actually would suggest it. I mean, the president is not doing particularly well in the polls. Cornyn is doing slightly better. And as I said, I would expect Cornyn to run a couple points ahead of Trump. So Biden could win and Cornyn could win. I think the idea of Trump winning and Hager winning is pretty much not going to happen. So we'll have to see how it goes. A couple of words about the legislature finally, and that is that we've already got a speaker's race up and running. As I pointed out to Ross today, it's later than the last one. You already had a whole bunch of candidates in the speaker's race. Ellen, you may remember that at the rural conference 2 years ago, we had the end of the speaker's race on that day. And we had a couple of candidates for speaker with us that night in College Station, Fort Price and Drew Darby, who had gotten out of the race because they knew that Dennis Bonnen had the votes. So the speaker's race is really broken out this last week. Sanfronia Thompson announced last Friday. We've had 6 other people get in. As I mentioned to a smaller group before we started here, John Cyrier has already gotten out after getting in yesterday, and he's endorsed Jeannie Morrison. But we're expecting a few more Republicans. We're expecting a few more Democrats. And then we're going to see what happens on Election Day. And on Election Day, we're going to know who has the majority. And then the contours of this race are absolutely going to change. We don't know what the session's going to be like. The pandemic is still going to probably still be in effect. Public health emergency. We'll have the members. We'll have select numbers of their staff. I don't know that we'll have a lobby. I don't know that we'll have the public. And to the everlasting glee of the members of the legislature, we may not even have the press there. So I would just simply say the Texas Tribune is going to be even more important for you to pay attention to this stuff. If no one is allowed in the building, wear your eyes and ears. And of course, the big story is going to be the budget deficit. We have budget deficit in the current cycle. We had about a $12 million, $11 billion turnaround from a surplus to a deficit because of the economic downturn. And I think heading into next session, all expectations are that the budget is going to be a huge problem, maybe not as bad as 2011, but possibly. And that instead of everybody thinking, how can we find new money for new things, it's going to be Lord of the Flies, everybody fighting to keep what they've got. That 11.6 billion that you all, many of you on this call, worked hard to get in there, to get to buy down property taxes at a local level on schools and to invest in public education, teacher salaries and raising the allotment per student and full day pre-K. That was only a 2-year investment. Got to come back and do that all over again. And I'll just tell you, it's no matter what anybody tells you, it's going to be harder this time, given the budget environment going on. If you enjoyed what you heard and you're not already a member of the Texas Tribune, let me encourage you to become one. And with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and I will go to comments in the chat. Okay. So this is from, it says D. Thompson. I don't know who the D is. Maybe it's David Thompson. If it is, hi, David. What percentage chance do we give the Texas House of flipping to the Democrats? I would say sitting here right now, if I'm honest about it, it's about 50-50. At the beginning of this year, I thought it was a very long shot at best. I described it as a 3-carom bank shot on a dive bar pool table at 2 in the morning. And as I would remind people, sometimes that ball goes in, right? But not likely. I think it's absolutely 50-50 right now. Dave Carney, the governor's political consultant, said with a straight face the other day, there is a 0% chance of the Democrats taking back the Texas House. What a load of bullshit. There is absolutely a chance. In fact, it is significantly greater than 0 or 5 or 10. It's at least 50-50. I had a Republican consultant tell me this week that if voting stopped only with early voting, not election day, just early voting, Democrats would pick up a net 15 seats based on what they're seeing. Now, it's not going to be that. It's not going to be that. But it may very well be, I mean, it could be 9, could be 10, could be 11. I'd like to know how many of the seats that Democrats won last time are truly at risk. I get different intelligence on that. I have some people tell me Kalani's fine, Beckley's fine, Rosenthal's totally fine, don't worry about Tallarico, Goodwin is fine. Then I have people tell me, well, maybe Beckley's not fine. Well, maybe Retta Bowers has a problem. If the turnout is 12 million, it is absolutely better for Democrats than Republicans just because the party in power never benefits from a turnout at that magnitude. And 3 million more votes from the last election. Goodness gracious. And then D. Thompson also says, what few races should we watch that will likely determine the final outcome? Well, the first thing I'd say is, if you see any of the Democrats I just mentioned who won in the last election, if you see them losing, that's a bad sign for the Democrats taking back control of the House. If they're all holding, And if you see, for instance, I would say if I'm going to watch one county on the Texas House, I would be watching Collin County. Collin County's got a congressional race that shouldn't be competitive, but is. It's got a couple of House races. I'd be watching Tarrant County. There are a bunch of Tarrant County House races that are competitive. Those, to me, would be the tells of whether this is going to be a good night or a bad night for the Democrats. Sandy Dochin. Hi, Sandy. If Democrats pick up a few congressional seats, would the Texas delegation be more moderate and collaborative in working as a cohesive team, or become more polarized vis-a-vis the ideology of the candidates? Well, I know what the candidates would say. Oh, of course, we're going to work with the other side. No, it'll be more polarized. I think Lizzie Fletcher and Colin Allred have done about the very best job they can, the two who won last time, at playing closer to the middle. But I do not think necessarily that what you're going to see are in the people elected. I do not think you're going to see 50% plus one Democrats. I think you're going to see Democrats. Now, you may not see super progressive Democrats, but you still are going to see people who are, following Speaker Pelosi, voting with the Democratic Party, reading from the hymnal. And so I don't necessarily think you're going to see a more moderate. I mean, you'll see some collaboration. But look, if the Democrats take back control of the U.S. Senate, which I think is a high likelihood at this point, and Biden wins, and the Democrats pick up more seats in the U.S. House, the Democrats are going to realize they've got an opportunity for the next 2 years to try to get as much of their agenda passed without the Republicans being able to prevent anything from happening. And especially after this rushed confirmation hearing for the Supreme Court justice, Democrats are not going to be in the mood to hear how they ought to slow their roll. So that's my observation there. Hi, Mark Williams, the great Mark Williams, excellent tennis player. Many of the Texas voters are new or have no primary history. Indeed. Have heard that the R's have been more aggressive in registering new voters. I have not heard that. I've heard the opposite. I would also make an observation that people without a voting history in Texas, I mean, we just have no way of knowing where they're coming from. Did they come from Utah? Did they come from California? Did they come from California because they're kind of hippies and they want to live in Austin? Did they come from California because they're pissed about taxes? I mean, there's so much that we do not know. There is so much that we do not know. And so I don't know if they're going to break more for Biden or Trump. Again, I would look at the overall turnout number as much more interesting to me. If the Democrats do not benefit from a 12 million or so turnout in this election cycle, then there's no hope for them. I go right off the roof of the embassy at that point, and I never go back. What do my tea leaves say? This is from Chloe. Hi, Chloe. What do my tea leaves say about potential state leadership changes in 2022? Well, look, if you're somebody who is advocating for a Democratic governor or lieutenant governor or other statewide elected officials to be Democrats, you do not want Joe Biden to win in this election. Why? Because the first midterm in the first term of a president is always bad for that president's party. So I think if the Democrats win control of the Texas House, for instance, and Biden wins the presidency, I think that you have a high probability that that majority is a 2-year majority only, and that they better get as much done in the Texas House under Democratic leadership as possible. Now, I may be taking the negative case here. I'm taking the under, which is how I go, right? I'm always taking the under. But conversely, if Trump gets reelected and it's the second Trump midterm, I actually think that you have a better chance of Democrats getting elected statewide, because after 6 years of this guy, they're going to be like, enough already, we can't. And I think you have a whole bunch of potentially interesting candidates lining up to run for statewide office in the event that those are winnable elections. So I'm going to just say that potential state leadership changes in 2022. Ask me after we know who won the presidency in 2020. I will say this: if the Texas House goes blue, one of the people who is going to be most responsible for that, given his hard work and advocacy, is one Beto ORourke. And there are drumbeats that Beto ORourke might be thinking about running for governor in 2022. If he engineers the return of the House to Democratic hands and the state goes blue or blue-ish, and he wants to run for governor, it's going to be pretty hard to deny that he's earned it and deny that he would be an attractive and galvanizing and motivating candidate if he decides to run. Win Rosser. Hi, Win. Regardless of who controls the House, what is the single most important thing to watch regarding the outcome of the speaker's race? The House is going to be governed by a narrow majority, much more akin to 2009, when Joe Strauss got a 76-74 House when he won the speakership. I think the most important thing to watch regarding the outcome of the speaker's race is whether this is in fact 76-74 or 77-73, or whether the Democrats overperform. I think the likelihood of the Republicans overperforming is not great at all. But the Democrats actually, I mean, you know, the wave could be a tsunami. So let's say the Democrats end up at 80-70 or 81-69. Then I think the speaker's race ends in a more leftward place. I think you have an Oscar Longoria, a Joe Moody, a Tracy King. If the House is a narrow split, you have somebody who can work with the other side. You have somebody who's going to get Republican votes. But I think if the Democrats win back the majority in a big way, as opposed to a small way, then I think the likelihood of it being a more traditional, progressive, or you know, sort of dyed-in-the-wool Democratic speaker, I think that goes up. But I think the split is material. Louis Malfaro, hi Louis. Medicaid expansion. You know, apparently I heard Dan Huberty this morning did not vomit when Medicaid expansion came up at your conference. Look, and Joe Strauss actually has now come out and said, you know, King's X, I think Medicaid expansion would be good for Texas. If the Democrats take back control of the House, you better believe there's going to be a discussion about Medicaid expansion. Now, the Senate is never going to go for it. It occurs to me that if the Democrats take back control of the House and the Republicans retain the Senate and retain the center office, it's going to be like Congress the last 2 years. The Texas House will be the Pelosi House. The Senate will be the place where Democratic hopes and dreams go to die. And you'll have a Republican in the chief executive's role who is not going to go along with the Democrats almost certainly anyway. In fact, I think probably the motivation of Greg Abbott to compromise with the Democrats is even less than the motivation of Donald Trump to compromise with the Democrats in Congress. So I think if the Democrats take back control of the House, I do think you have Medicaid expansion as a topic of conversation. If the Democrats don't take back the House, Lewis, I could be wrong, but I think it doesn't even come up as a serious subject. Lynette Greenhaw, hi. Please talk about the impact of this session if the House flips to Democrat and how they work with a Republican and conservative Senate. Well, that was exactly where I was going. So I think there are two theories of the case. You know, Dennis Bonnen was elected Speaker because the House institutionally wanted somebody who could stand up to the Senate. And you know what? Leave aside what happened after the session with Bonnen and Michael Quinn Sullivan. Bonnen, if that was the charge for Bonnen, Bonnen did a good job at that. Bonnen was an advocate for the House. He was an institutionalist in the non-pejorative sense. And so I think, first of all, what the House is going to want is somebody following Bonnen who has the same affect toward the Senate. Somebody who's going to stand up for the House, be an advocate for the House, be tough, who can make a fist. And, you know, that's going to mean that the Senate has got to come to the table and negotiate on some stuff, which did not really happen toward the end of the Strauss era, and I know that's overstated in some ways, but not really. But I think during the last session, you did see the House and the Senate on a more even footing. So I think that's how things get done. I think that, you know, the Senate can't get things done without the House can't get things done without the Senate. And so I think it's important for the Democrats in the House to wield the power that they have if they have the majority. And the choice of speaker in that respect will be important because the leader is going to set the tone and will have the relationship in theory with both the lieutenant governor and the governor, as well as other statewide elected officials. Okay, Mark Williams back again. Obviously, keeping HB3 in place and funded is critical. Do I have a sense of investments in early childhood to deal with the unfolding childcare crisis and the need for sufficient quality childcare? Look, there's no argument that the story of this pandemic is going to be a whole bunch of things that were already needs that did not necessarily surface. They were the submerged part of the iceberg. They were there, but they were not as visible. And the childcare crisis in the state is clearly now a visible part of the iceberg. And you cannot reopen the economy without having adequate childcare if we are still stuck in a kind of holding pattern on education and on our ability to get out of the house. So I do think investments would be amazing. But look, let me tell you something. Again, if the budget is as bad as the budget could potentially be in the next session, you're going to have to fight like hell to keep everything that you got last time. And I just think it's going to be much harder to identify new money, and you're going to have to prioritize. There may be some aspects of HB3 that have to go. And in fact, I've already heard people who are on the school finance committee, the interim committee, saying that we're sort of looking at the playbook in the worst case scenario and trying to figure out what we can let go. Let me take the last question, and as I understand it, we're then out of time. Jessica Addis, how could the outcomes of redistricting and new maps look different with a Democratic-led House or Republican House? If the House flips, how do Abbott and DP respond to those maps? Well, you're never going to take the politics out of redistricting, but having a Democratic speaker means that you're going to have a different point of view. It's not going to be unanimous. And I don't know how it's going to go. I don't know whether there's going to be an adequate opportunity to negotiate on maps or whether it's ultimately going to be a standstill and get kicked to the legislative redistricting board. But look, we're getting to a point where we're having a two-way, not a one-way conversation. Regardless of whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, the most important thing here is that we be an advocate for Texas, not for an ideology. And when we actually have an honest and open conversation with competing ideas and values and views, that is always better for Texas, no matter how it comes out. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Win. You guys on this call are some of my favorite people in the world, and I love the opportunity to be with you. I only wish it were in person next time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Evan. As always, thought-provoking, interesting, compelling. We appreciate you joining us, and we will look forward to the next time that we can be in person. This has been, an interesting way to gather. 2 days of virtual sessions. The upside is we've had, I think, a tremendous amount of engagement. More than 80 people on this session, more than 80 on the broadband session this morning. So we appreciate your thoughtful engagement, your showing up, your questions, your membership, your support for the mission of Philanthropy Advocates. The moment in time that we find ourselves in, this current reality, nothing that any of us could have imagined, but Jen, Becky, and the Community Foundation of Texas team that put this on for us, handled all the tech. This has been among the best virtual conferences I've attended. Of course, many of you know I was in Oklahoma City with no power on Wednesday, but I heard great things about Wednesday, and today's been fantastic. So we appreciate the work that it took to put this on, to ensure that it was seamless for us to get the most out of the technology, and importantly for us to figure out how we continue to engage in advocacy in, as I wrote earlier today in the chat box, a digital democracy. It will be as important as ever, perhaps more important than ever, that we show up, that we do our best to amplify the voices that are focused on ensuring high quality public education for all young Texans, from pre-K through higher education into the workforce. Like many things that we know now are critically important to our state's future, what we work for every day, what we invest in every day through Philanthropy Advocates and our advocacy partners has been shown to be critical. We know there are some gaps, but the good news is we have built a partnership that we know can make a difference, and that's been demonstrated as recently as the last session. And again, I'm looking forward to this session. It will be, as Evan says, it will be an interesting time. And so I'm going to call on Jennifer to join us again. I know she has some closing announcements and some parting thoughts, but from my standpoint, this has been a success. Demonstrates one more way for Philanthropy Advocates to be relevant to us when we need critical information. And I'm thankful for each of you and the work that you do and the support that you provide. Jen?
Thank you, Win. And thank you, Evan, so much. As always, an amazing job. I'm loving watching the comments come in. I just wanted to close with a few housekeeping pieces and then just a couple of final thoughts. First of all, many of you have asked if these sessions have been recorded and will be available. They will. So we will make those recordings available if there were any of the sessions that you missed, at least for some time period. So get with us on that if you are interested. Secondly, if you didn't get a chance to watch the health and education panel, which was the pre-recorded video, please go back and watch that. It's really fantastic. It's got some great information, a lot of the topics that have been covered over the last few days. In terms of what to expect from us, so you'll start to see a fully formed policy agenda for both Philanthropy Advocates and Educate Texas really come together in the next 4 weeks or so. You heard Evan talk about prioritization this session, and so you will see our priorities distilled down coming right up. So that's something that you'll be seeing and that we will distribute very, very soon. Secondly, I think you'll see our grantees really start to kick into high gear. Just to remind folks, we made 8 grants to fully support the work of our research and advocacy grantees around the issue areas that we care about. So you'll start to see a lot more from them in the coming weeks and months. And then just like Wynn said, we'll be calling on you. We know it will look different, so it very well may be a virtual call, but we will be calling on you to engage and make sure that your voices are heard. And with that, I would say, we're going to send out a link to an exit survey, so you can tell us what you liked and what you didn't like about the conference, so that we can learn the next time we try to do this. And with that, we want you to stay safe, stay healthy, stay sane, have a happy Halloween weekend, and happy voting, and have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.